Hello, and you're listening to Your Majesty's Secret Podcast. I like my podcast shaken, not stirred. Only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. If you'd like to check out more shows, go to foureyedradio.com.
Bond. James Bond. Shaken, not stirred.
Utter one more syllable and I'll have you killed.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
For your eyes only, darling.
I never joke about my work, 007.
For England, James?
Come in, Univex. James Bond here.
Am I going to have a problem with you, Bond?
Allow me to introduce myself.
You're that secret agent! That English secret agent from England!
No, you're cleverer than you look.
Still better than looking cleverer than you are.
My God, what's Bond doing?
I think he's attempting re-entry, sir.
007 reporting for duty.
Hello, the name's Berkeley, Ziggy Berkeley from Cinema on the Rocks, and with me is Eric Dewey from Socially Awkward Studios, and you are listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on the Four-Eyed Radio Network. And now it's time for you to question our judgment!
I question your judgment, sir.
You've been hearing that phrase for almost 3 years now. It's been Eric saying it to me or me saying it to Eric, but a few months ago, we invited you, the audience, to say it to us. Yes, we invited you to look back on our episodes when we discussed all of the James Bond films and give us your opinion of which of those discussions you thought we were off base on. The ones where you questioned our judgment. Yes, that was the basis of our Question Judgments contest. And for 2 people, we have taken their answers to heart, watched the movies they suggested, and of course, along with having them program the show for us this time around, we have also gotten them some fabulous prizes!
Fabulous prizes, absolutely.
Yes, which, for those of you who may have been listening to a previous episode, you already know that we purchased at Phoenix Comicon when we did our live episode there.
Yep. Yeah, we've been planning this episode for a little while, guys, but now we finally get to reveal the winners. I want to thank everybody who entered, first of all. It was a short notice contest. We kind of had it thrown out there in the middle of even somewhat of a hiatus. We kind of were few and far between on the episodes there for a while, but now we're kind of getting back into the swing of things, and hopefully we'll be on to a fairly regular schedule. I don't want to guarantee anything just yet, but hopefully we're getting things back together properly. But thanks for everybody who entered, but especially our 2 winners. Thank you very much for giving us the incentive and inspiration to go back and take a look at 2 films that we might not have taken another look at otherwise.
Indeed, and thank you again to everyone for hanging in while we have had our several months worth of technical and personal difficulties. We really do appreciate it. We get to see the numbers whenever we drop a new episode, and the audience keeps coming back, and so we know you're out there. We know that we've got our loyal fans, and we really, really appreciate each and every one of you, and as trite as it may sound, it means the world to us. So thank you very much. We appreciate all of you all around the world, and we appreciate the fact that you are all around the world. So thank you.
Yeah, that's another cool thing to see is when we take a look at these, we don't always see it just based on the listener numbers because that doesn't really give us a demographic. It just gives us pure numbers. But when we get these contests and we get these answers from all over the world, it's fantastic. We love it.
We do indeed. However, the first entry in our Question Judgments contest is regarding a movie that we did not love particularly very much, and the loyal audience member didn't necessarily love our discussion of it. Now, with that in mind, this movie that we're going to be coming up to, if I had made any bets, which I did with myself, before we released this contest as to which movie would definitely get an entry. Not necessarily the winning entry, but an entry. This was the first movie that came to mind that somebody was going to say, hey, we want you to look at this again. And honestly, this particular movie is one of the reasons I thought of this contest. Because, of course, when we started this show almost 3 years ago, one of the first things we did is go through every single movie. And that was before we'd really matured as a show. And looking back, there have been times where I think, we really could have done better, and there are some things I'd like to revisit. And this particular movie was one that stuck out in my mind when I came up with this contest. So, though the entry is a little harsher than I would have expected, it pretty much nailed a lot of what the spirit of this contest was supposed to be. So, without further ado, Eric, why don't you read our first winning entry and tell us who it's from?
All right. Yes. Before I actually read the entry, I do want to put a caveat out there. Yes, as you said, it is a little harsh, especially at the beginning. It kind of tones down, but I just want to say that that's okay. We asked you to question our judgment. We asked you to tell us what we did wrong, and we continue to. Every episode we say, hey, if you don't like something we said, if you disagree, if you agree, anything, let us know. Drop us a line. We've got all sorts of contact options on the Facebook, on the Twitter, on the email, on our website. We got tons of options. Get a hold of us. Let us know. And I'm totally okay with criticism because, hey, that means you were listening. You were paying attention. And we said something that you disagreed with enough that you wanted to talk to us about it. And that, to me, is just a level of interaction that I am totally cool with, even if you don't agree with me. So without further ado, hey, Steve from Santa Cruz, hey, you're a winner. And this is the entry that won for you. And I'm now quoting. I question your judgment regarding On Her Majesty's Secret Service, both the film and your episode number 12. Had that episode been my introduction to your show, I'd have not listened to another. You, Ziggy, state that for 30 years everyone knew the film was horrible and only in the last 10 years have hipsters taken to it. Really? Based on what? On Her Majesty's Secret Service is in my top 10 Bond films, and I've been a Bond fan probably for longer than you've been alive. My first time seeing Bond in the theater was Moonraker in 1979. Does that make me a hipster? Does Raymond Benson's positive analysis of the film in 1984 make him a hipster? Don't insult your audience. Your critiques of the film's flaws have merit, but you relied too much on hyperbole. The Bond resignation memento scenes were not the train wreck you presented. Eric came off like an annoying kid brother yelling, "See? See?" all over a few seconds of screen time that weren't at all distracting. Unlike the references in Die Another Day, Lazenby's performance there was fine and in most of the film was quite decent. I'd take him over Diamonds Are Forever's bored, doughy Connery or Moore's single-note smarm in Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun. I would have preferred Timothy Dalton, truth be told. The rest of the performances are almost uniformly excellent. Rigg, Lee, and Maxwell are outstanding. I find Savalas's Blofeld more menacing and believable than Pleasance's scarred troll or Gray's effete joke. The jump cuts and sped-up film of the action scenes are distracting, yet the action is still engaging. The avalanche scene is great and still holds up today. On Her Majesty's Secret Service is a very good, if flawed, film. An oddball perhaps in early Bond films, but not an abomination by any means. Watch it again. Learn to love chickens.
We do love chickens. We love chickens. And we love Steve's answer. Thank you very much, Steve. Like Eric said, very much appreciate it. And as far as the been a Bond fan longer than I've been alive, I'll just say thank you, thank you, thank you. I love being carded. I absolutely love it. It is just, it's entertaining for me. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. I know I sound a lot younger than I am. Now, with that said, I very much agree with a lot of what you wrote in there, because this is one of the reasons I was hoping that we'd get a good enough answer that we'd be able to revisit this particular film, because I thought that episode did rely a lot on hyperbole, and a little bit too much. It was an episode that we had planned from the beginning. It was one of the first episodes we came up with. It ended up airing at number 12, but it could easily have aired at number 1 or 3 or 5. And bearing in mind your comment, I'm very glad we didn't do that. But it's one that we were just building up to so much, and that we'd hyped it up in our own minds so much that we knew that we didn't like what was going to be in there. And so we just really ran with it, and we went straight through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man. So, yeah, I totally agree. We went with a lot more hyperbole than we needed to. As for the hipster thing, I will say I used it as a generalization. Probably shouldn't have. That said, I base it on the fact that, honestly, until the last 10 years, I had personally met no one who would admit to liking this movie at all, and had only seen a very few written commentaries from people saying that they enjoyed this film. Now, of course, many of those commentaries were written pre-internet, so it's a matter of hit and miss what commentaries one sees over that time. But so that's where the hipsters comment came from, because that's usually where I've been seeing the love coming from this film. It's just been a recent groundswell in my experience. Now, not saying that there weren't ever anyone who loved any of these movies, because let's face it, there are people who think Manos, The Hands of Fate, is the greatest movie ever, and I offer those people a 30-pack of Milwaukee's Beast, because they probably need it. With that said, this is a much better movie than Manos, The Hands of Fate. I will definitely say that.
It's high praise. It's high praise. Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I said, Steve, we appreciate your response, so much so that you were chosen as a winner. So you will actually be receiving the On Her Majesty's Secret Service poster that we picked up at Phoenix Comicon this year, and I'll be sending that out to you, hopefully so that it arrives around about the time that this episode actually airs. If you're listening to this, Steve, and you haven't received it yet, don't worry, it's on the way. Give it a day or two. I know you don't account for transit times, who knows, but we'll get it out to you as quickly as possible.
And apologies, we definitely would not consider you a hipster, sir. Now, if we're with that in mind, if you look at the characterizations in On Her Majesty's Secret Service, one thing that I don't think anyone can deny is that this is the swingin' London version of James Bond, without jumping into, of course, what would become the Austin Powers parody territory of later on. But I think there's no coincidence that Austin Powers is almost certainly George Lazenby's Bond. I think we can all agree on that one. This is the era that a lot of hipsters are looking back to.
Yeah, definitely. There was a couple of things that I noted when rewatching this film, and part of it was that whole thing. I felt they took the Bond sexuality a little too far in some cases. Like, yes, Bond is supposed to be a ladies' man, we get that, but he's supposed to be the ultimate ladies' man, not a cheap, gonna use the same line on multiple girls in a row kind of ladies' man.
But you're a picture yourself. Let's go over by the firelight.
Oh, yes. Ridiculous to me to think of Bond as that kind of guy. You know, just the pickup artist type of guy, as opposed to being so suave and so debonair that girls want to be with him. More of the, I'm going to trick girls into wanting to be with me kind of guy. And I don't like that in my Bond. I want my Bond to be legitimately smooth, not, fake.
And that was actually one thing which, looking at On Her Majesty's Secret Service from the swingin' London cultural perspective, is just kind of shocking, because this is the era of total sexual freedom, and this is really, like you said, a 1950s dad Bond when it comes to trying to figure out how to pick up girls. He strikes me almost, as he's making his approach to women, as somebody who's either looking to have an affair and has never done it before and has no idea how to go about it, or recently divorced and has no idea how to date after not having had to try since 16, 18. And it doesn't jive with the rest of his character, because he tries to be the smooth playboy every other occasion. That's you can tell that's the groove that Lazenby's trying to go for, but when it comes to sexuality, it's just, dude, I've seen better in cougar bars. It just seems off.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree. It's just, it's not the kind of Bond I want to see, and so it really turns me off of the performance. And I get that that's not even necessarily Lazenby's fault. That's partly the writing there, obviously. But it doesn't, I feel like it could have been pulled off better by a stronger actor. But, we'll never know, because, unless somebody decides to do a shot-for-shot remake, like they did Psycho, and give a different actor the same lines and see what happens. But I doubt that very much will happen.
And I will just pop in to point out that Gus Van Sant's Psycho is the most pointless remake ever.
I concur. Now, there were a few things. Rewatching the film, I took some notes because I was really paying attention. I was taking Steve's comments to heart. I wanted to see if maybe my dislike of Lazenby had tainted everything else in the film for me. And I'm being honest, yes, it did. When I ignore Lazenby to some degree, when I kind of push him out of the shot in my mind and just pay attention to what else is going on, I'm able to enjoy the film a little bit more. Now, I'm not saying that this makes it better than I thought it was, but I was able to kind of enjoy it a little bit more by ignoring him and focusing specifically on the rest of the cast.
Now, let me throw in one more point, just out of curiosity, because when we had discussed the film originally, you had also never read the book. Now you have. Did that alter your perspective any?
Only in the fact that I do appreciate how true to the book the movie is. However, it almost makes me dislike the movie more because they still somehow managed to make it bad, even though it's very true to the book, which was actually quite good. So it's really weird for me to look at it and be like, wow, this is really close to the book, but yet somehow much worse. And quite honestly, looking at it, I put the majority of that on Lazenby. That's the one thing, like, I can get behind people talking about Rigg was excellent in this. Absolutely. Lee and Maxwell were good. Even Savalas, even though I don't necessarily agree with the menacing and believable aspect of it, I do believe he's a good actor and played the role that he was given very well. And I can deal with that. But when anybody tries to tell me that Lazenby was actually a good Bond, I don't see it. I still don't see it. Even re-looking at it, even trying to look at it. There are a couple of things. First of all, the fight scenes. We gave a lot...
But before let's stick with Lazenby for a bit, because before we get into stuff that we may have changed our opinions on...
Well, I was going to talk about Lazenby specifically, but that's okay. You go ahead with your point.
No, I was going to say, I agree that I tried to watch this with completely fresh eyes with regard to Lazenby, and my opinion expressed in the Holiday Returns episode, where the number one thing, if I could change any single item in the entire James Bond franchise, all of the movies, my number one thing still is Lazenby sucks. I just can't stand him. I just can't do it. He's not a good Bond. And I think that's very, very important to note specifically that we're talking about James Bond here, because that demands another level, that you have preconceptions, and while some may say it's not fair to go in with those preconceptions, once the character's been established for as long as James Bond had, 5 movies is definitely enough, then you have expectations that you have to meet, and this guy was totally not up to it, and honestly, I don't think he was up to any Hollywood leading man expectation. He very much comes across as exactly what he was before this, and that is a competent pitchman. I think he'd be a very good commercial TV actor and maybe be okay as a supporting actor in certain types of independent film, which is actually the attitude that he had after this movie was finished filming. When he went to the release party, he didn't go looking like James Bond anymore. He'd already grown a full beard, and he was dissing the Bond franchise at the press junket, saying, well, it was a alright experience, but I'm over this now. I really have no intention of wanting to come back, which relieved Cubby Broccoli to no end. And he said he thought that James Bond movies were finished, that after this, he could see the writing on the wall in Hollywood. It was going to be turning to more serious, dramatic films, artsy-type films, and not this James Bond action stuff. So one finds out afterwards he didn't even really respect the part as much as one would have hoped he would have. But even if he had, he's just not engaging. He doesn't have... I'd actually put him exactly in the same place I'd put Anthony Sullivan, the guy who does infomercials. That's exactly the space. But wait,
there's more.
Yes! That's exactly the space as an actor I put him in. He can engage my attention for about 30 seconds or a minute, and then I'm like, okay, I'm kind of done with this now. And Diana Rigg, his co-star, said flat out, even years later, her tune hasn't changed, where she denies the rumors that they hated each other on the set, but she says she was cast specifically to add gravitas to the film because, let's face it, George is no actor. She said that, and I can't help but agree with her, because he's competent, and that's all he is. It would be like giving just some no-name person the reins as any other character who we've known for years and years and years, and just saying, well, any stuntman can play James Bond, or any stuntman can play Jason Voorhees even. We've proven that can't happen. I mean, I know this is a totally different set of franchises, and the James Bond franchise is at a much higher talent level. But you can't even put just any old stuntman in a hockey mask and make Jason Voorhees work. So you sure can't do it for James Bond. And that's what they tried here. They even, in one of the posters, not the version which Steve won, by the way, we got him the better version of the poster. In one of the versions, they just cut Bond's face out as though it doesn't matter. And I think it does. But sorry, that tangent kind of broke into you for quite a while.
No, that's okay. I agree. It all comes back to Lazenby. I did not like his performance. And I find it very hard for anyone to... I looked for things to try and defend. I really did. I looked specifically at things that I know I had picked on before and tried to look at them in a better light. The fight scenes, for example, we had talked about how, because of the camera work, they looked choppy and forced, in which, they were speeding up the camera. They were doing different cuts and stuff to try and make it more action-packed, well, without the techniques of modern era. But it just, I was watching it and I'm like, it still comes off as extremely cheesy, and not just because of the sped up camera work and the obviously fake things breaking apart at the slightest touch, but Lazenby is just hamming it up like nobody's business. Every punch he throws is this wild haymaker or uppercut that's just ridiculous. I'm like, you are supposed to be a person who knows how to fight. You cannot fight like that. You throw one punch like that, you're completely wide open for the next strike. No, Bond knows how to fight. This is the action of a guy just, flailing about and hoping for the best. And instead of Bond, yes, I appreciate a gritty, dirty fight that looks more realistic than a choreographed, martial arts scene sometimes. But this isn't what Lazenby offers us. What we get is just these wild, flailing actions that somehow he manages to come out on top of each time. So I can't defend him even in the slightest on the fight scenes. I can't do it.
Yeah, and I agree there as well on. You had similar camera technique in Connery's fight scenes, and yet Connery at least looked like he'd been in a bar brawl or 7 in his life. I mean, he looked like he knew how to throw a punch, he knew how to do some judo, he knew basically how to handle himself physically, whereas Lazenby looks like some preppy college boy.
He looks like me if I got into a fight, but I don't claim to be James Bond.
And that's actually exactly where I was going. Some guy who never gets into any kind of fights, and he just suddenly finds himself getting bumped into by drunk frat bro who decides it's time to go. This guy has no idea what he's doing, and he just thinks, okay, what do movies look like? And exaggerates from there.
Right.
And because of the giant jump cuts, where he's pulling back for the wild haymaker, and then jump cut, and the haymaker is already on the follow-through, it looks like it gives the impression that they had to do it. Not that they were doing it as a filming technique, but that they had to because he couldn't actually throw the punch. Now, whether that is true or not, that is the overall impression that we're given. And so, even though I tried, as you said, to watch it with, more open eyes, that's exactly what they still saw in the fight scene.
Yeah. And just in every respect, I could not believe Lazenby as Bond. I mean, there were times, I even have notes here written down, Lazenby doesn't even walk like Bond. Especially in the beginning of the movie, he's almost clomping around. And I'm just like, no, Bond is smooth. Bond is aware of his body and his surroundings. He will walk with a purpose, or he will walk with swagger. He's not going to clomp around anywhere. That's just not the way he would be walking. It just doesn't even work for me. So, bottom line is, I could not find anything. I looked through my entire notes. I watched the entire film carefully, trying to find something to throw a bone to Lazenby's performance. And I couldn't find anything that really stood out. I do take that back. There was one moment in the film that I felt that Lazenby had a slight hint of Bondianosity to him. and that's when he's looking at the Playboy while his safecracker is working by itself, and he's glancing at the Playboy and the little smirk that he gets at just that moment. And I was like, okay, now that's Bond. He's not leering at the girl on the page. He's not, whipping it out and rubbing one out or anything like that. He's just, And I'm like, okay, that for that brief flash, I saw Bond on Lazenby's face. But that was it. For
and
the
did you notice
2.5-hour
else?
movie. What's that?
After he's done cracking the safe and dropping that off, and by the way, that is a really, really wonderful scene in the movie. As far as the espionage plot, I think that is actually one of my favorite scenes overall, that whole sequence. When he goes up and the construction crane delivers the package over to the balcony, he grabs it, and something that we now use cell phones for, he's got this giant chest that he has to use to crack this safe. Takes forever doing it. Like you said, he's reading the Playboy, and I agree with you. That had great bonding necessity. Finishes it off, of course, just in time, because otherwise it would not be an action thriller. But the other thing that made me grin there, he steals the centerfold. He puts the magazine back, but he keeps the centerfold.
Oh, that's right.
And he's still kind of looking at it in the hall, and then he puts it in his coat just as he's passing the guy whose office he'd broken into.
Yeah.
So I did enjoy that scene. I thought it was the best scene in terms of the, like you said, the bonding necessity of the espionage plot. There are some other great scenes in the movie, but in terms of Bond doing his thing, I agree with you. I think that was the best moment. And beyond that, I think the movie did not do Lazenby any favors, because along with the jump cuts and the fight scenes that made him look possibly less qualified than he was, and apparently he's also an outstanding skier but wasn't allowed to do his own skiing, so that's too bad. But even though those scenes turned out very well.
When he did do some skiing, he was told not to ski outside of the filming, and then he did, and he broke his arm, which delayed some things. So of course they told him, hey, no more of that.
Well, But the other one thing that they did that did him no favors, and this isn't his fault, this is very much on the filmmaker's fault, is when he became Hilary Bray, the horrible decision to dub. Just pointless. No reason for that at all. Just none. Because they'd done all of their correspondence via letter, and if we're going with the conceit that no one has ever seen James Bond before, so they're not going to recognize Bond physically, which is, of course, left over from the order in which the books came out, because obviously we've had the real Blofeld who should have recognized Bond instantly because they'd met before.
Right.
But we just let that go as a continuity cop problem. Fine. But the dubbing is horrible, and it's distracting.
To be fair, the original thought process, when they changed actors, they were also going to write in a storyline where he had received plastic surgery to change his appearance. They decided against that. They instead decided, hey, we're not going to call attention to the fact that it's a new actor. We're just going to let it slide and just let a new actor jump right into the role. And then they decided, yeah, let's do that, but let's also throw a stupid line breaking the fourth wall to point out that we changed actors at the same time. If they'd have gone all the way with it, it might have been better. But so I can understand, as far as the continuity issue, I don't hold that against this film, because they had a lot of, they were making the movies in different order than the books. They were making the, change in actors, and they were deciding whether or not, hey, are we going to do this plastic surgery bit, or are we not going to? And so I forgive that, and I don't hold that against the film in any way, shape, or form.
But that dubbing.
Well, so much of the dubbing that has been done in the Bond films is completely unnecessary, though. I wouldn't say that this is unique to this film.
It's not unique, but the fact that they did it to Bond himself, True. I think that's what takes it over the top for me.
Yeah.
I mean, the only dubbing that I think comes even close to being as distracting, and I got over that pretty quickly, is the dubbing in Thunderball for Adolfo Celli, because it is so obvious. But it's jarring, and it throws me when he's doing that. I think it was a completely unnecessary decision.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And again, that's not his fault, but it does distract from his performance, and it just piles on to the reasons we don't like him as Bond. Now, there were some good things about this film. You know, we're trashing it pretty hard, as we did previously, but at the same time, there are some things that were good that we could talk about.
Indeed.
Did you have anything more to pile on, Lazenby, before we move on?
Well, I just wanted to note that, as you said earlier, looking at it, it's definitely Lazenby's performance that taints a lot of things for me in this film. And if I look at the film without Lazenby, it has actually moved further up on my list of ranked order favorite Bond films compared to where it would have been when we started doing this podcast.
Right.
And it's not just my view of the overall film that has changed because of being able to divorce it from Lazenby, because as we've been talking about, Lazenby still sucks. I can't get past that. I'm sorry, all of you Lazenby apologists out there. I'm very, very, very sorry. I just hate Lazenby's performance, and I can't get past it.
Yes.
But there was another performance that, in our original discussion, I very much disliked. But over the course of our discussions of other films and the books, and having that all churn afresh, there's a performance I've come to respect more.
All right, and who is that? I think I might know, but I want to hear.
That is Telly Savalas' Blofeld.
That is what I thought.
Now, with that said, I think his big swinging dick, because I still think that's the best phrase to describe his performance as Blofeld, would really have been great. If we only could park him in one film, I'd rather have parked him in Diamonds Are Forever, because he's Vegas, baby. I mean, he's Vegas with the big swinging dick, everything. But now, if from the mainstream Bond films, just the Eon films, and that's the Eon films as of July, August 2015, so before Spectre comes out, I would now have to say that Savalas does play the best Blofeld.
Okay.
And the reason I couldn't see that before is it's a matter of prejudice. And I tried to think about it because it at first doesn't make sense, and that's what caused me to rethink the whole thing. When we're first introduced to Blofeld in You Only Live Twice, we have, as Steve describes it in his entry, a scarred troll played by Donald Pleasance. And the thing is, Pleasance is such a good actor. Regardless of anything else, he's such a good actor with so much screen presence and screen charisma, and he's allowed to invent the face-to-face version of this role for the screen that it becomes the indelible mark of whom Blofeld is supposed to be. And so that's the prejudice I carry watching the rest of the series. When, in fact, going back to the books, Blofeld was nothing like that. Blofeld wasn't even a scarred troll. I mean, the Blofeld of the books. Do you remember Alexander Goodenough at Die Hard?
Uh-huh.
The last one to die? He is more of an accurate picture of what Blofeld was in the books, except maybe you'd have to age him a little bit, and unfortunately he died far too young. But if we're going to go to the kind of menace that the concept of a Blofeld should be, because at this point it kind of transcends the book, because Ian Fleming brings Blofeld in the concept of the great supervillain, and he does a great job with the concept, but the character in each of his stories falls short somewhere, and I think this is an ideal that it's very hard to hit. Just like you have the character of Fu Manchu in Sax Rohmer's books, but the stories he's in stink. So it's really hard to find a sweet spot combination, but Telly Savalas actually does a really good job as a villain. And I think it's Donald Pleasance's initiating performance that prejudiced me against seeing that, and then, as you were saying before, the taint of Lazenby that washed over everyone who wasn't either an established cast member or Diana Rigg.
Right.
And so I have reformed my opinion on Telly Savalas' Blofeld. I now give him a big swinging thumbs up. And I still must thank that smooth voice for You Love Chickens. You love chickens. Aw, yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I think, we had originally poked a lot of fun at Savalas' Blofeld, and I think a lot of that was some prejudice coming off of how much we disliked Lazenby. And the fact is that the Lazenby hate hasn't changed, but I can accept Savalas' Blofeld now. I don't know if I can go so far as to say menacing and believable. Sorry, Steve, but definitely a good choice for this film and this Blofeld. And you can't go wrong with the voice. Definitely, we already we said before that the voice was perfect when he's doing the hypnosis tapes and whatnot. That was perfect, just the way it was. So, all in all, Savalas' Blofeld definitely a good choice. I think we can update our thought process on that.
And the other thing that I think works well for Savalas' Blofeld is you have no question whatsoever that he could run a major criminal organization. I mean, he has got that big swinging dick charisma where I'm running the show, I'm the boss, and even badass criminals are going to think twice before messing with me. They're going to take orders from me. So I think he does have the believable menace there. So I think it's not just acting charisma, but I do think he also has bad guy charisma. So I'll just add that on there as well. And I also find him an interesting counterpoint to the character of Draco, who is, of course, supposed to be our likable criminal in this movie. What do you think of Draco?
I thought he was all right, I suppose. There were some... Obviously, he was supposed to be still a bad guy, somewhat, but we weren't supposed to necessarily hate him. But at the same time, I still felt that there were some moments where he was just a little too over the top with specifically the sexism. that kind of bothers me a little bit. I understand, yes, in the times, and we're trying to establish that he is this dominant male figure who believes that men should always be on top and the women should be listening and doing whatever they say. And it's not until the very end of the film when you kind of see that for all his talk, he has very little actual power when it comes to women, especially his own daughter. But yeah, I would say... I think the actor did a good job for that role. I think he pulled it off. It's a character that we don't necessarily hate, but aren't too fond of either. But we don't see any real reason for Pond to be going after him or anything like that.
The way that I saw the character, and I think he is more likable in the movie than he was in the book, because in the book, of course, Fleming being Fleming, we had the sexist pig, old school, old family Italian really, really come through. And I get it. It's part of the character. That's fine. And I thought he was a well-written character for what he was supposed to be in the book and in the movie. And like you said, I don't have to like the character, but he fits what he's supposed to be. But I think he was made more likable in this movie. And I think the way that they made him more likable is set Draco next to Darko Karim from Russia with Love. Start drawing parallels between how these characters are presented. They're real close. That just really struck me hard this time around. It's been a little bit in the background before, but this time around, it really struck me that these characters are very similar.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it's not just their attitudes, it's even physically they look kind of similar. It's just something that kind of jumped out, but otherwise, I have no problem with the actor, no problem with the character. Worked out well. Now, the one character whom I heaped major praise on before, and still do, both for incredible job of portraying the character and for holding up scenes when the male lead just wasn't quite cutting it. And yeah, the crush is still there too. Diana Rigg is magnificent as Tracy, and she still is one of my top 2 Bond girls. How do you feel about Diana Rigg as Tracy?
Well, first of all, she's smoking hot. I mean, absolutely. Just beautiful, beautiful woman. As far as the acting is concerned, again, a bright spot in this film. Really made it watchable in some places that otherwise it may have been completely unwatchable. I mean, there's scenes when she's not in there, when it's just Lazenby, leading an entire scene, it can get rough. It can actually get painful to watch. But whenever she's on screen, even with him, you can watch it and enjoy it, and it's good. So, yes, absolutely. Not ever going to knock Diana Rigg's performance in this film. It's definitely good stuff.
And I like her not just as the quote-unquote Bond girl, or even as eventually Bond wife, but I also really appreciate how she handles herself in the action sequences, because when you have the scene after Bond has escaped Piz Gloria and he goes down to the little Swiss village at Christmas time, and we have ads for Toblerone and Tobler rum. I never noticed that before, but that's the first ad that Bond goes by when he enters into Switzerland. I would like some Tobler rum.
Tobler rum. Delicious.
But in that scene, Diana Rigg and Tracy really take over. I mean, she's the one who gets them out of there. And she climbs into her, as she calls it, Big M, her 69 Mustang. Or is it 68? And the film's 69, but the Mustang might be 68. I'm not that much of a car guy. But either way, she gets into this really awesome car. And she's the one driving. At least that's what we're supposed to think. But I like how she's handled it. I just love her in that scene. Bond is sitting there in the passenger seat thinking, what the hell am I doing on this side of the car? There's no wheel. I mean, this is the side of the car I normally sit in, because the other thing is the Mustang is set for American driving in terms of its configuration, even though it's in Europe. But Lazenby is sitting there like, where's the wheel? I have no idea what I'm doing here. And it's not that Lazenby is actually doing anything bad in the scene. I'm interchanging Lazenby with Bond in this particular explanation. So because really all Bond has to do is sit there and look vaguely clueless, amused, and occasionally kiss Tracy's cheek, and she's handling the action scene. And you can tell Diana Rigg is having fun with it. So I really like her in that scene, and I really like whenever she's got to go into a confrontation, she goes in, when she finds out that Bond and her father are coming, she distracts Blofeld with the seduction routine and then is perfectly willing to get into a fight, and she looks more convincing in a scrap, this time I am talking Lazenby, than Lazenby does. So she totally holds her own, not just as the Bond girl, but really as our second lead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. She was definitely, without her in it, this would be just an absolutely unwatchable film, I think.
Which brings up then, it's the same point this is the same point I brought up in our first discussion of the film, is that On Her Majesty's Secret Service is one of those Bond movies, and there are a few, that I end up splitting into two different films piled on top of each other. Rather like On Her Majesty's Secret Service, the novel by Ian Fleming, I think of as two different stories piled up on top of each other. And in each case, those stories are the adventure intrigue story of James Bond going after Blofeld and the courtship of James Bond. And my opinion hasn't changed there, in that the adventure intrigue story of Bond going after Blofeld is kind of weak in the movie. And a lot of that, again, is Lazenby's performance, because I just can't buy this person as Bond. And then the plot it seems sillier on camera than it does in the book. Because in the book, it's exactly the opposite. I think the adventure intrigue plot is better in the book than the courtship. Because the courtship just seems like some kind of actually really creepy thing in the book. Which we've discussed before, where Bond just kind of gloms onto someone he thinks should be a mental patient. And Tracy is not the stronger character that Diana Rigg made her in the movie. And so in the book, it flip-flops for me. But in the movie, the adventure intrigue plot has enough holes in it that it falters. But the courtship of James Bond, whether you agree with how it comes about or not, because of course we have Draco saying, I want to arrange this marriage, which for a lot of modern society, myself included, is a loser on its face right there.
Yeah.
But if you just accept it for when and where it is, those scenes, I think, play out the best in the movie. Because there you have Diana Rigg's dramatic performance able to carry no matter what Lazenby does. And in fact, Lazenby being kind of clueless kind of works there, because isn't that how it often works in relationships? Where even the smartest, most brilliant, strongest man is reduced to around the pretty girl who's stolen his heart. It just kind of works. Yeah. And then, of course, the very best part of the entire movie, the wedding, that entire scene, everybody involved. And this is the one point where we're outside of the scene that we already talked about with the Playboy magazine, where I think Lazenby turns into Bond for just a moment. And yes, it's the scene as written, but in this moment, he gets it. And that is the moment when Moneypenny is looking at him, and she's crying, and he looks down at his hat, and he throws the hat. That is a beautiful moment that nobody can ruin. I love that scene.
Yeah, that's definitely a fantastic scene, and it's just, I think, honestly, I think Lois Maxwell makes that scene. Just her face, because you see she's crying, and you see the happiness on her face. You know, it's a happy crying because she's at a wedding, and, you know, she's one of these people that cries at weddings because it's such a happy occasion, but then you see brief flashes of, but she's also sad because even though she knew deep down that it was never going to be a thing between her and Bond, she was still in love with him. And you see that on her face, that she's such a terrific actress that you can actually see both the happiness and the joy on her face at the same time. And I think that's
the happiness and the joy, and perhaps the sadness as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's what I meant. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Yeah, that's what I mean. You can see the happiness and the sadness on their face at the same time, and that's acting to me right there. That's just absolutely beautiful. And for me, that's what makes the scene. It makes me completely ignore just about everybody else involved in that particular scene.
I agree that she is the strongest part of the scene. She makes it, but I do think Lazenby got it. I actually think that that's the one point outside of the Playboy magazine that he got it. Because that byplay between Bond and Moneypenny was always, you never saw it for more than 20 seconds a movie, but it was 20 seconds of cement in terms of it was one of the anchors of the movie whenever you saw it, before and of course afterwards as well. But that whole scene is just fantastic. So everything surrounding the courtship of James Bond, I'm okay with in this movie. And it's the one set of scenes where I can even look past Lazenby, because either he doesn't have to act, he gets it for just a moment, or Diana Rigg can do the acting for him. So, how do you feel about specifically the romantic aspect? Aside from, not the sexual aspect, you talked about that before, but specifically his romance with Tracy.
The only time I had an issue with it was there was the kind of courtship montage scene in the middle of the film, which just bored me to tears. I don't think that was anybody's particular fault, because it wasn't even a dialogue part. It was just, okay, we're just going to show them they're over here, and now they're over here, and now they're over here, and they're happy together. We get it. It didn't add anything to me. It didn't sell the relationship for me. It just seemed like filler. And when you've already got a movie nearly 2.5 hours long, you don't need filler. So that particular montage didn't do anything for me. But other than that, I don't have an issue with the courtship of James Bond, so to speak.
See, I'm okay with the montage, because you had to have something where you went from, you can tell Tracy could have feelings for him that she hasn't articulated yet, because, of course, when she thinks she's just part of a transaction, she's crying, but very, very statuesquely. And you have to go from that to, yes, okay, we're in love. And if you were to put an actual scene or two in there where they're sitting at the cafe and they're having a heart-to-heart conversation, I don't think that's anything anybody wants to see. I don't think anyone really wants to see James Bond having the goo-goo cuddly conversation, or the I'm a real man who feels feelings with feeling conversation. I honestly don't think the world was ready for that.
Well, not
so
for
I
Lazenby,
think the silent montage took the place of scenes we really didn't want to see, but that had to be there.
I guess I can go along with that. But like I said, at the time watching it, I was just kind of like, okay, move it along. I get it. They're dating. Whoop-de-doo. But I guess I can understand, in place of actually having to hear Lazenby speak some more, then, okay, I'm good with it.
Of course, we all know that deep down, Eric would really rather have seen the Sylvester Stallone training montage from Rocky IV. Great training montage, by the way. So, what about the plot of Bond going after Blofeld?
Well, I mean, it's not the worst in any of the Bond films or books, as far as, here's Bond trying to... He knows about Spectre, he knows about Blofeld, he wants to get him, and he's found a way to get that information in the form of Tracy's father having that information. And so I think he's seizing an opportunity, and I'm okay with that. I still don't like the whole resignation scene. Just seemed unnecessary to me, the way that it played out. Although I would say I did like the interaction between M and Moneypenny in that scene, and how they kind of dance around Bond as far as like, oh, he's going to turn in his resignation, and she tells him that she changed it to leave, but really it was, she switched that around. M knew about it, and I'm like, okay, I see what's going on here, and that's kind of fun. But at the same time, the whole, oh, well, I don't get my way, I'm going to quit then. No, you're James Bond. You're 007. You don't quit and whine and pout because you don't get your way. Instead, you say, yes, sir, and then you go do whatever the hell you want anyway. That's what you do.
And what's interesting about that is, in comparison, this is one of the slight changes they made from the book, because in the book, Bond thought going after Blofeld was a damn waste of time. And that's why he wants to resign. Not because he is being told to stop going after Blofeld, but just the opposite. Because he's told to keep going after him and he doesn't want to anymore. So it's an interesting switchover if you're familiar with the book. And because Steve made a point about it in his entry, I do want to touch on this. When he's going through the personal effects in his desk, and this is one of only 2 times we see James Bond's office on camera, and we're seeing relics from the previous films. In and of itself, no, it is not an abomination. However, I can tell you exactly why it grated on me. And because I was conscious of it and trying not to have it grate on me this time, it only itched a little. But I can tell you exactly why it grated on me, and that's because, to me, it's a flashback. See, all these flashbacks are a flashback to the opening credits sequence that was needlessly full of flashbacks.
Yes.
And I don't like the opening credits sequence, and I thought it was a really bad way to go, because instead of establishing our new Bond, all the opening credits sequence does visually is give us an hourglass with scenes from the previous movies. And so they're saying, like,
featuring everyone but Bond, because we obviously don't want to show that other actor before we show you a new Bond.
Yeah, we don't want to show you the other actor because he's the other fella who we just talked about. But on the same token, we're reminding you of the other fella because, hey, whatever this new guy does, remember all this good stuff? Yeah, just keep remembering that.
Yeah.
And so it's my dissatisfaction with that opening credits sequence, and it's specifically the visuals, because I love John Barry's music that was put in the opening credits, and I do understand the mindset of using an instrumental piece under the logic of, if you were going to come up with something with lyrics, at the time they were of the opinion that you had to have the title in the lyrics, and On Her Majesty's Secret Service does sound like only Gilbert and Sullivan could write the tune. I mean, of course, now we can call the tune whatever we want and don't have to mention the title of the film at all if we don't want to, like Quantum of Solace, for example, All Time High from Octopussy. So I love the music, it's just the montage at the beginning doesn't work for me, and so the scene in the office flashes back to that montage, and that's why I disliked it so much. So, moving on from The Office now. Please continue.
I know, I was going to say the same thing. That part of the scene, he's like packing up his desk, and it's like, okay, yes, we get, oh yeah, you've got the knife, oh yeah, okay, you've got the breather, okay, whatever, but it is just kind of a cheap ploy to be like, hey, remember how good some of these other movies were? That's what we want you to think of when you're watching this thing that we're trying to call a movie here. I didn't like it. And yeah, like you said, with the opening sequence, same thing. You get that forced nostalgia. There are ways to do it right. Skyfall did it right. There are ways to do it very, very wrong, and that's where I think this film and another film that we've talked about that did it over the top in the, hey, let's show everything we possibly can from the old films to try and make up for how bad this one.
With that said, this film did not go nearly over the top as much as that one did.
No, not at all. Other than the opening sequence. I would say the opening sequence did go quite a bit over the top, but that was just graphics, and I can forgive that if the rest of the movie was better, but since it's not really, I can't. So I don't know. Do you have anything else to specifically add about On Her Majesty's Secret Service?
Things that I do appreciate, again, the chase scene with Diana Rigg driving the Mustang.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was brilliant. I really love that scene. And I do love our first of, and we'll see this again, the James Bond Olympic-style chases.
Mm-hmm.
I love the skiing sequences. I do like the bobsled sequence.
The bobsled chase was awesome. I like that.
Even though on high definition, the obvious special effects techniques with the background screaming and the flailing that obviously is not happening while you're in the real bobsled does show, but you don't care because it's a cool scene. And I'm good with that. So I do like the chase sequences. I think that it's important to distinguish them from the fistfight sequences that you see Lazenby in, because I still don't think any of those work.
No.
Diana Rigg's fistfight works. Lazenby's, I still think, does not work at all.
Yeah, I concur, and that would be my basic final thoughts on the film. Looking at it through fresh eyes, and trying to look around Lazenby as much as possible, I was able to enjoy the film a bit more. I allowed Diana Rigg's performance to really sink in. Lois Maxwell was fantastic in it. I think Bernard Lee did a good job in this one. I wouldn't say it was his best, but I think it was good. In general, I think just about everybody, save Lazenby and some of the girls in Piz Gloria, because there wasn't a really strong actress in that bunch either. But they weren't main characters.
I honestly could have been okay with Ruby, the one with the chicken allergy.
Chicken.
And this is a personal bias on my part. It's really hard for me to get past the hair. And that's a stupid bias on my part. I just can't stand her haircut. How shallow is that?
I don't care about her hair. I just didn't think she was a particularly strong actress. But then again, the part wasn't particularly strong either, so I'm not going to sit there and claim that she ruined a great part. Because
as a veteran of many Universal Studios horror films, where the loud Cockney style or just loud country British accent comedic female character is often thrown in there, I think she played the part as written perfectly well. Because I've seen that part played in many, many movies. Right. It's just they usually involve invisible men or vampires or, sewn up monsters, that sort of thing.
Of course.
But
yeah.
I just wish they gave her a better haircut.
But yeah, I would say, looking around Lazenby, there were some good points. Like you said, I did enjoy the bobsled chase. The car chase on the ice was fun. The ski chases were okay. It did have elements that were better than Lazenby. But overall, as a film, I still have to look at it as a complete product. And the complete product includes Lazenby. And that's not something that just can go away. I can't, in good conscience, recommend somebody watch this film and just tell them, okay, just ignore the main actor. Like, just pretend he's not there and watch everything else. I just can't do that. I did it for the sake of this episode, but I can't in good conscience tell somebody else to do that and try to get them to appreciate the film. So I still have to stick with my basic general original thought process on this film. I do not like it. I think it is not a strong film in the franchise, and I owe 99% of that to Lazenby's pathetic performance in it.
But isn't there something you love?
I do love the chicken. I love all chickens.
As you should. And I love chickens. And Diana Rigg.
Oh, yeah, that too.
And I will say that my opinion of this movie has gone up since we originally talked about it and since growing up, really. Because up until very recently, this has been sitting either in the basement or on the first step above the basement. And I think it's a little bit better than that now. I still don't think in the pantheon of James Bond movies it's a great movie. I would definitely not consider it top 10. But that said, if it's on, I'll watch it. And I think that says something about the entire James Bond franchise, that even its weakest films are somehow watchable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so with that, thank you, Steve from Santa Cruz. We thank you very much for your entry. It is exactly something that I was hoping somebody would say, so thank you for indulging my magic 8-ball. And also, I would like to give a shout out to the gentleman whose name I did not catch, who visited us at our panel, So You Want to Do a Podcast, at Phoenix Comicon, who came up to us specifically and said that he hoped that we might visit on Her Majesty's Secret Service as something to discuss because it was his favorite James Bond film. He had not heard our podcast before then, and I mentioned to him at the time that we had done an episode, but since we had just drawn the winners, he was the one person outside of Eric and myself who knew in advance that this was going to be one of the movies we discussed in the Question Judgments episode. So, sir, I never caught your name, but if you're listening, I do remember you, so thank you very much.
And sorry that we haven't changed our opinion drastically on the film, but you know what? That's why this franchise is so great. It's because there isn't just one clear-cut winner and one clear-cut loser among the bunch. They all have their own merits, and they're all going to be... Every single film in the franchise is going to be somebody's favorite, regardless of how bad somebody else might think it's going to be. It's
Even
going to be
though
somebody's favorite.
Sometimes that's a big challenge. Big challenge.
Very true.
Which brings us to our next entry.
Yes.
This, in the exact opposite of Steve's entry in the Question Judgments contest, was the absolute last movie I ever expected anyone to question our judgment on. I would have expected someone to question our judgment about Card Sense Jimmy Bond before someone questioned our judgment about this movie. With that said, this particular entry happened to be the very first entry we got in the contest. I mean, the contest hadn't even been 24 hours announced, and we got this. And over the entire span of the contest entry period, this still stands as the single most fun answer we got. I love this answer. And so, thanks to our very loyal listener, Ningxin, from my former home of Vancouver, British Columbia, we are, in fact, basically redoing the entire Abomination episode. Because the film she chose to question our judgment on, with the single best fan theory I've ever heard for James Bond, and one of the best fan theories I've heard for any movie franchise. In fact, it jives very well with another thing we discussed in a different episode about a video game. Because she came up with such a fun answer, well, I'll read it to you in her words. Beginning quotes from Ningxin. In your infamous Abomination episode, Ziggy compared the plot and many of the stylistic choices of Die Another Day to that of a badly written fan fiction. I don't think any listeners will object when I say that the movie just doesn't make much sense at times. However, I would like to propose a theory about Die Another Day, which may help explain some of its problems. To put it simply, what if everything that happens from the title sequence onwards in Die Another Day is a hallucination taking place in Bond's mind during and after his torture at the hands of the North Koreans? Is this why the film experiences such a drastic change in tone and quality between the pre-title sequence, which many consider to be one of the better parts of the film despite the surfing, and the rest of it? Watch the movie again with this in mind. It may not improve as a film, but it may become slightly more palatable. The frequent speed ramping and illogical jump cuts certainly make more sense if it is all just part of Bond's mind going into overdrive. All of the references to previous Bond movies and the rehashed Diamonds Are Forever plot are there because Bond's subconscious is recalling things that have happened to him in the past, just like we do in our own dreams. And the dozens of one-liners spouted by seemingly everyone in the movie? It's Bond's brain making this up. Of course everyone is going to talk exactly like he does. Thanks for reading my rather tenuous arguments about this terrible movie. I hope you guys have fun rewatching it, if that's even possible.
I gotta say, this one was a lot of fun, because I was like looking at this, I'm like, okay, that actually does make a little bit of sense, you know? And so I did rewatch it with the specific intention of looking for points that could lend credence to this theory. So I'm interested to see if you saw some of the same things that I saw, because I think this theory could actually pan out.
I think this theory is bloody brilliant, and it's just so much fun. It's everything I loved about the premise of 007 Legends, the video game. You know, the one where Eric killed me for about an hour because he played his odd job, and I just played his Jaws. Stupid me, big giant target, as opposed to a short guy with a hat who could hit me in the balls. Anyway.
I just like that you could throw the hat in the game. That was pretty awesome.
It's just, this theory is brilliant. And so, Ningxin, I raise my glass to you. This is wonderful. Thank you for your entry. It's the most fun one that we got for the entire contest, and it's fantastic. So, you have won a poster from Die Another Day. I promise we got you the coolest looking one we could find, because that was the one movie where there were a lot of choices available, but we got you the coolest one we could find, so we do hope you like it. And now let's talk about Die Another Day.
Yes. So I rewatched this specifically with this theory in mind. Instead of just watching it as a film, I specifically thought to myself, okay, at what point does it transition from real to his dream? At what point does, and there were a couple of different points at which I thought that transition could be made.
I remember in our original discussion, which I'm actually really glad we're doing this again, because I think we talked about this movie for maybe 20 minutes the first time around, because we just both universally agreed we hated it. And I remember your opening question in that discussion was, so when did you start hating this movie? And we both said in the first 10 seconds with the surfing scene. Do you still feel that way about the surfing scene in the opening sequence?
I think I can, because it is so early and because it's just kind of there and then done, I think you can kind of glaze over it if you want to. It's not a plot point that needs to be focused on, so you can just kind of go ahead and ignore it. It is still really bad. I mean, come on now. But I think it's much more easy to ignore because it is just right there at the beginning and then done. So if you do ignore that and just go in from the point they land on the beach forward,
okay, now just because we want to go from that point forward, I want to get the surfing part out of the way. For my own part, I agree that the surfing is silly. I would have preferred just seeing a Zodiac pull up, or even Bond jumping out of a swimming crocodile. We could have had that reference right away. I mean, just something. And the reason I want to make sure we discuss this part is because another good friend of the show, Tile, in the comments section on HerMajesty'sPod.com, when we discussed this episode originally, wanted to make sure to point out, because we discussed the surfing sequence as CG, and he pointed out the behind-the-scenes footage that shows there were real surfers who did this. And watching it again, yes, I see the real surfers, but I also still see the same CG that I saw before that unfortunately washes out, for me anyway, the efforts of the real surfers who really do a fantastic job at their craft, and dangerous stuff I certainly wouldn't get on the damn board. But the problem is, I can see the surfers for who they are in the close-up sequence. But when you go to the back shots, where you're looking at the larger wave, that, if it's real, it still looks CG to me. Maybe it's not, but it looks that way. And once they actually pull onto the beach, I'm sorry, I do believe the backdrop on the beach is CG. So it's, whether any of that is CG or not, it still feels that way. I get that the surfers themselves in the close-up shots aren't, and I can see them for that, but it still has a fake feeling to me. And that may also be a carryover from the fact that surfing in just seems like the most fake method to get onto the beach in North Korea. But I just wanted, since one of our fans explicitly pointed that out, I wanted to make sure that got talked about.
Absolutely. No, and like I said, basically, once I got past that scene, then, all right, the opening scene, besides that, is actually fairly decent. It's got some good action, it's got some fun, it's definitely got the Bondinosity going, so I'm kind of on board. And we talked about this when we talked about the opening scenes, that it sets you up like, hey, this might be a good movie. And then the rest of the movie happens.
I do like when you have Colonel Moon, you think he's just sitting there, being a badass, punching the punching bag. Then he says, open the bag. And it turns out he was going all Jason Voorhees on a guy inside the bag.
Well, especially when you say that'll teach him to lecture me, and then 5 seconds later, you're going to need to find me a new anger therapist. I was like, oh, jeez, I wouldn't want that job. Don't sign me up for that one. Not interested.
In fact, had I thought about it, that might have made it for my funniest moment for our Funniest Moments episode for this particular movie. Because I got an actual, real, honest belly laugh out of that one. Because I had forgotten about the subtlety there with the anger therapist.
Yeah, it was definitely good stuff. Like I said, the opening scene to this is decent. It's got some good, strong action, even the plot, in as much as what it is, because you haven't gotten into the craziness of it yet. At this point, it's just, okay, dude's trading weapons for diamonds. We don't know that he's going all diamonds are forever on us with those diamonds. We just know that he wants some diamonds. Okay, no biggie. It still upsets me a little bit, all those mines out there. My hovercraft just float right over them. That's not how hovercraft work. The downforce on those is actually more force than the weight of vehicles would be. So you would still set off those mines and destroy your hovercraft, but, okay, I'm willing to glaze over that fact for just a moment.
Physics.
Yeah, I'm like, you have any idea the downforce necessary to raise one of those off the ground?
So what are you going to do next? Call
magic.
Neil deGrasse Tyson and ask him if the stars are in the right position?
I should. It won't matter. If James Cameron had been directing this film, then it would matter because he'd go back and fix it in post. But, So at what point do you think, if you're following this theory, what is the moment you think it switches over from real life to his fantasy?
I think the moment it switches over is during the credits.
Okay.
I think the moment it switches over is during the credits because I take Ningxin's theory and I extrapolated from it an endpoint. And the way that I interpret this theory is everything that you see in this movie is going on as the hallucination in his mind as he's being waterboarded, drowned, kicked, stung, drugged, whatever the hell else they're doing to him. This is the fantasies concocting in his mind. And then at the end of the movie, where you have the obligatory pre-post, we're not quite sure, quite a sequence, I would...
Don't take it out yet. Leave it in for a few more minutes. It fits so perfectly.
The thing is, well, we'll talk about this in more depth later, but considering that they've obviously had sex relatively recently, I find it odd that she's that dressed again at that point, but it still fits in with the theory because what in my mind I tacked on to Ningxin's theory is that scene is the functional equivalent of the Kiss Me Quick scene at the end of Paul Verhoeven's Total Recall. So you have Schwarzenegger, in this case Brosnan, kissing the girl because he has just saved the world, and then we go to credits. And that's true in both movies. Now, because Paul Verhoeven loves to spoil his own endings, which is one of the things I don't like about him. I actually like a lot of his movies. I love Total Recall. Basic Instinct is actually one of my favorite movies. I like RoboCop, but when he comes up with an it could go this way or that way ending, he loves to tell people in interviews afterwards how he thinks it went, and I don't think he should do that. But his theory for Total Recall and the way he says he made the entire film is under the assumption that it's all a dream, and the moment he kisses the girl at the end, he wakes up lobotomized. And so I take Ningxin's theory as that this entire movie, from the credits onward, is Bond's fever dream, and when he kisses Halle Berry again, he wakes up just in time to die. And that is how James Bond ends. Period. Which would explain the reboot afterwards.
Right. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you about the ending at all. I do think that that's the same thing. As soon as it hits credits, I think, boom, he's dead. Here's my theory on what's happening here. I think the entire movie takes place in the split second that he's actually dying. So I think the moment that it transitions from real life into his fantasy is the instant he flatlines in the hospital. that's the moment that I chose to be like, nope, that's the transition. Because then, boom, he comes back all of a sudden, hey, everything was going against him, everything was bad, everything was horrible, and then, boom, he flatlines, then comes back, hey, he's Bond again. He's kicking butt, taking names, flirting with the girls. Everything's all good again. Suddenly, everything's going his way. That's the moment I think that it happened. And then from that point forward, and it's all, the entire movie happens in that split second between the flatline and brain death.
Interesting. The reason I don't pick it up there is that you have, in the moment before that happens, that tail end of the scene before where it looks like Bond is trying to figure out how to fake the flatline. Because it's like he's looking around thinking, okay, what can I do to stop this? Because I don't think he really flatlined. I think he just unplugged the contact but kept it on loose on his chest so that it wouldn't pick up the heartbeat.
Well, the way that I felt they made it, that we were supposed to believe, is that he was just in such control of his body after having been through so much pain and torture over the last so many years, was that he was literally able, he just basically recollected that, and in doing so was able to slow his heartbeat down to the point where the machines thought that there was no heartbeat at all, which is a very Bondy thing to do. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of he's not really in control at that point, he's literally dying, and then from that point forward, it's his fantasy. It's a tenuous theory either way, but
it's an interesting theory, and it's worth thought. And I'm actually very curious what our audience thinks. In fact, specifically, Ningxin, what do you think? Do you agree with how we're getting this so far, where we're taking your theory, running with it, and deciding he dies? And then, if so, do you agree with where either I or Eric is making the starting point to the fever dream? Please let us know. And this is open not only to Ningxin, this is open to all of you, of course. Whole point of this whole episode is getting feedback from people, so you can always reach us. You can go to hermajestiespod.com, and where you find this episode, you can post in the comments section. You can also go to facebook.com/hermajestiespod. You can post there. You can email me directly. I am at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com. You can also find me on Twitter at cinemaotr. And you can find the show at Her Majesty's Pod. Eric, where can they find you?
I am available on the Twitters at Eric J. Dewey. You can also send me an email at eric@hermajestiespod.com or eric@4edradio.com, whatever works most easily for you. Let us know what you think.
So, with that in mind, and we have our different points of divergence as to where reality and fantasy split, what do you think of the trade between where Bond is finally traded over for Zhao? How did that scene play for you?
Well,
both in terms of how Bond reacted and then afterwards how the British react to Bond. I'm curious.
I think it has enough of a... This is why I choose to believe that the switch over from reality to fantasy happens after this moment, is because at first I want to think, no way, they would never do that. But then I think, you know what, they actually had some sound, they made a good case for why it happened. There was specific information leaked, and it was made to seem like it was leaking from his location, and they had intel that stated that he was the only prisoner at that location, so they literally thought, oh crap, James Bond, the guy who knows everything about our government, has been broken, and is just, as they said, hemorrhaging information. So they had to do something to get him back. And their best option was be like, okay, we'll give you this guy who's got some diamonds in his face, and you give us our guy back. And then I thought the way that they treated him, as far as like, you should be dead right now. Like, why didn't you take your cyanide pill? Why didn't you kill yourself before it got to this point? And just the kind of, you just traded one person for another because we're not letting you out until we know what state of mind you're in and what's going on with you. So all that had just enough ring of truth to it to keep me invested in the story up to that point.
Okay. For me, the way that I looked at it, if it really happened, I completely agree with you. However, looking at it from where I decided that reality split, I think that it helped set up his entire fever dream in a way that would be palatable to Bond. And the reason I say that is, even though from the Fleming books onward, and we then get retreated to this with how Daniel Craig's Bond approaches his own life. Bond has been operating in a world where you never hang on to tomorrow, because even though tomorrow never dies, you will. And you will probably die suddenly and unpleasantly. And so that is why, as we've discussed before, James Bond gets his pleasure out of experiences and fleeting things. He gets his pleasure out of fine meals. He enjoys gambling not because it's going to get him money, but because it's a momentary thrill. He enjoys sex because it's in the now and because sex. He doesn't furnish his apartment very much. His office is poorly decorated. He's very much an in the moment's experienced person because he thinks he can die at any time. And yet, he has survived so often, so much. He's been through so many adventures that by the time he goes on his mission to kill Colonel Moon, he can't believe that something so simple would cause him to fail. That he could just suddenly and so comparatively easily fail and get caught and get tortured and not escape right away, but actually be stuck in prison for 14 months. He can't believe that that would happen to him. And so the only way he could possibly have failed in his mission, in his own fever dream mind, is that some bitch double-crossed him. Specifically, some bitch. And so he starts with that as what happened, why he failed, because hell no, it couldn't be his fault. And it certainly couldn't be random chance because he's the ultimate boss of chance. So no, in order for Bond's ego to be satisfied, some bitch had to betray him. So we start with that. That's the whole reason why not only he failed, but why now they're trading for him, because the bitch betrayed him again and says he's hemorrhaging info. So now he's being traded for the very person who he has come to hate through his most recent adventure. And let's face it, even though they kind of started to get along, Pierce Brosnan Bond's relationship with M was still pretty frosty. And I think he still had her in bitch category. So I think that it's perfectly natural for him to decide that, nope, M would sell me up the river because I'm a misogynist dinosaur, a relic of the Cold War. All that stuff she said to me at the start of GoldenEye, that stuck. And no matter what happened in the movies that followed, I was never in the room when she said those good things about me, so I don't know those things. She would never told me that I'm the best to my face. No, so I just think she's a stone bitch. So that's what I'm going to fantasize she does to me. Sells me up the river. And I have to, outside of her sanction, break out and solve this thing. So that's why I put where I did and not where you did. Because I can already see those two elements that happen in between as being part of the fever dream.
I can understand that. I just think for me, it seems more right for the moment to be the moment things start to go good for him. Because everything is bad up to that point. Even the fact that he's being traded, it's almost like this glimmer of hope, but then he's like, oh, but nope, you're still in a sort of prison. And I don't think for a moment that he was happy about the trade. Even though it meant he was out of one prison, I don't think he was ever happy about the trade. The way he looks like they're trading me for you, and so I see what you're saying. I'm still going to go with my theory.
All right.
My made-up theory is better than your made-up theory. No, I'm just kidding.
Hey, that's what this is all about. All right, so we go on from the point now. He escapes from the quote-unquote prison ship, and he's in Hong Kong. And we get to a part where originally Wei Lin from Tomorrow Never Dies was supposed to be written in. And Michelle Yeoh said, nope, sorry, I'm too busy. Whether she said it because she was really too busy or, nope, forget this. We don't know, but... So she was supposed to show up at that hotel. She didn't. Instead, we get random Chinese agent in the middle of From Russia with Love. Because, of course, we're trying to film him in the bedroom. And this is a point where I will actually agree with your normal prejudice. In From Russia with Love, it made sense. In this movie, what are the Chinese going to use it for? Seriously. I mean, they got nothing. There's nothing here. Just, they got nothing. So he fucked the masseuse. So what? They got nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That again, but that's why it lends in, at this point, we're both thinking that this is in his fantasy world. So again, everything is just going perfectly for him. He escapes with no problem. He gets to this hotel with no problem. He finds a friend that he knows and is able to get a suite and clothes and food and everything. And then when something treacherous might be going on, he sees it instantly and sees right through it, and not only sees through it and stops it, but turns it around and gets the information he needs right away. It's all too perfect. And that's why I think it really, when you're watching the movie straight through, you're like, really? Like, this doesn't make any sense at all. Why would this sequence of events be playing out this way? It's ridiculous. But if you look at it through the lens of, this is all going on in his mind, this is just bits and pieces of past experience being shoved together into a storyline to make him feel good. Okay, I get it now.
And speaking of, his next step on his journey, because of course he has cleverly tricked the Chinese foreign devils into getting him out of Hong Kong and on the trail of Zhao, who happens to be in lovely Cuba. Why is he in Cuba? Because Bond needs an excuse to go to the Caribbean, because he's been there so many times. He needs a Caribbean location. There have been too many movies there for him not to be in the Caribbean. So off to Cuba he goes. And I've come up with an excuse for Jinx.
All right.
I'm not saying I like her. I still hate her guts. And I know I'm in a vast minority here. I still do not like Halle Berry as an actress. I just don't like her. I think that she doesn't act. She steps on the screen and is entitled. And I don't mean that as others are entitling her, even though sometimes they do. It's like she walks onto the screen, it's like, I'm Halle Berry. That's all you need to know. And I think that very much shows up in this movie. Now, I think she's fine in a more supporting role. I like her as Storm in X-Men. She doesn't have to carry the movie. Anything I've ever seen that she has to carry, on the other hand, the entitlement gets on my nerves real fast. However, Halle Berry aside, my excuse for Jinx that fits well into this theory is this. Jinx is an amalgam of two characters. The main character she's supposed to be is Felix Leiter, who one would think would show up in a James Bond fever dream, where he's reliving his whole past, because his past has involved a lot of Felix Leiter. But there are two problems with the original Felix Leiter. One, we're assuming that all the other movies happened before, which means that Felix Leiter has one arm and one leg and was eaten by a shark, and that was one of the most traumatic experiences of James Bond's life.
Yeah.
And he can't go back to seeing Felix the same way again. It's because it brings up the painful memory of what happened, and we're totally not about pain here. Which is why we have the other problem with Felix. Because of James Bond's particular sexual orientation, you can't fuck Felix. And James Bond is looking to get some. So, why not combine the screw toy, in his mind, with the Felix character into one? It just works. And if you're wondering why, if he's trying to relive his whole life, he doesn't pick out Tracy as a Bond girl, I think it's the same reason he can't pick out Felix as his American government buddy, because it's too painful.
Right.
The close relationships are painful.
Yeah. Yeah, the entire dream sequence, as we're calling it, or the entire fantasy here, is about him being the best. And it really shows, I think in this movie more than any, he doesn't ever get himself into too much trouble after that beginning scene. There's times when, he's like, oh, okay, looks like he might be in a little bit of trouble, but no, not really. It's more him saving everybody else. Everybody else is getting into trouble. Jinx is in trouble. These people are in trouble. He's going to go save them. And he's always able to get out of everything so quickly. There's never really any point where he seems to be in real danger. The most tense scenes are when he's saving somebody else. He's in control still. There's very, very few points where Bond is not in control of the situation for more than, a second. And so I think that really lends credence to this theory of the fact that it's going on in his head, because, of course, in his head, he's going to be the best at everything. He's going to be the best fencer. He's going to be the best fighter. He's going to be everything. Speaking of the fencing scene, that even makes a little bit more sense in this context, too. It's so ridiculous to think of any club anywhere allowing that to go on, no matter how rich one of the people involved is.
Especially because it's implied that this is the club from the books. This is Blades. This is M's club.
Yeah. It's so ridiculous to think that any real club would allow this to go on regardless of how much money one of the participants may or may not have. It looks like the kind of place where everybody who goes there is rich, so they're not going to let one person disrupt everybody else in this fashion.
Especially new money.
Right. But in the context of a dream sequence where everything just keeps, it's escalating and escalating and escalating. First they're fencing, and then all of a sudden it's like, nope, now we're fighting with actual swords. And then, now we've got this dude's got a katana all of a sudden. And now we're fighting with broadswords. It's just, when you look at it in the context of, okay, this isn't really happening, it becomes a fun scene. Whereas before it's just ridiculous. It also explains one of my biggest peeves about that scene.
That Madonna's in it?
That Madonna's in it. She's a celebrity. Of course, some celebrities might make their way into his fantasy somewhere. Maybe he had just watched a video of one of her songs before, or something had happened at some point and he had seen this. And so, hey, you know what? Hey, Madonna's in my dream. There are better choices out there, of course, but, it makes sense. Celebrities show up in my dreams all the time. So all of a sudden it makes sense to have Madonna there.
And in a corset, no less.
Well, that part wouldn't be in my dream unless I was having a nightmare. Yeah. That wouldn't be in my dreams unless I was having a nightmare, I'll tell you that much right now.
Now, I will say I do appreciate the fact that they managed to hide her gigantic veins in the sleevelessness. I very much appreciated that because her veins have gotten creepy. But going back to Jinx, so now that we have an excuse for her existence, and we needed one.
All right.
The scene where he first talks to her, so after the abomination that is her trying to be Ursula Andress and failing, no matter how much everyone talks about it.
I worked that into the theory as well, because again, he's reliving bits of his own life, so that's the reason she's trying to behave like that, is because that's what he's remembering and imposing on this particular part of the fantasy.
And I do see that. I just still consider it abominable.
It was not good.
But she is already trying to talk him into bed as soon as he's trying to talk her into bed. So it's like, of course she's willing. And yes, we've seen women drop for Bond just instantly before, but this is one of the most pathetic of the instant pickup scenes I can think of in the franchise. I mean, yes, it takes longer, but that's because they're having a really, really bad bit of verbal fencing. But let's face it, when he says mojito, he's saying, fuck me? And her first answer is, sure! And Halle Berry herself wanted to have a much longer sex scene with nudity and more screaming. And she had to be told no.
Like, just calm down. Just calm down. You got other movies for that.
And this is the same woman who had to be paid $500,000 just a couple years earlier just to show off her boobs in short swordfish. She was paid an extra $500,000 just for that.
To be fair, though, that scene does, kind of make the movie. No. That was a good movie. I actually really enjoyed that movie. Yes, it has its flaws. I'm not calling it a cinema masterpiece by any stretch of the imagination, but I thoroughly enjoyed that movie, and not just for that scene. That scene helped, but not just for that scene.
So once we get past Jinx and the sex scene, because of course Bond has to have sex pretty soon since he did get it on with the masseuse in China, and it's an all-night affair. Now he has to go see the bad guy, and we come up to one of my favorite ridiculous concepts of all time in the James Bond universe, white guy surgery. What do you think of white guy surgery?
I think it makes... see, here's what I did to make it make sense into this context. And I'll fully admit that a lot of my rationalizations were specifically tailored around this theory and twisted to fit into this theory. But
I think that's the way to go here, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm wondering where you're going with this.
So my theory is that, they show him on the plane flipping through the magazine article about this Gustav Graves. So I'm thinking maybe this Gustav Graves guy actually is a real guy who just happens to be a diamond mogul or whatever the heck he is. And Bond happened to have read this article before being captured in the first place. And now he's twisting things around in his mind. He's got this new image in his face. He wants to be fighting this Korean guy, but somehow still in the back of his mind he knows that guy's dead. He really believes that guy, when he fell off the waterfall, he's dead. So he's putting into its place this image that he got from this magazine sometime before he was captured, and turning it into this whole, like, okay, well, how can I make this the bad guy I want it to be for this fantasy? And the only way to do that is with white guy surgery. It also brings up an interesting thing, the fact that the bad guy in this particular scenario can't sleep. If you think about the flip-flopping of the fact that in our scenario, Bond is constantly asleep or dead, and the bad guy is constantly awake, it's the perfect opposite. Only if you follow along with this scenario. So I think it kind of works. It kind of fits in there.
I do think that works. That's brilliant. That hadn't occurred to me. I like that though, because it makes sense. Because if Bond is asleep the whole time, in his own mind, he's never actually sleeping. He's always awake, and therefore the bad guy always awake. That does make sense. Now, as far as him having seen Gustav Graves before, that I'm not sure of, just because the ideas presented of his biography is that he first appeared on the scene 2 months after James Bond was thrown into prison. Now, agreed, he could have altered time in his own mind, but I don't think he needs to. I think he could have made him up whole cloth. My theory behind the white guy surgery is that it's his amalgam to Blofeld getting the plastic surgery and the doubles at the start of Diamonds Are Forever, which is, of course, what we have. We're going to end up in Diamonds Are Forever. So I think that this is the amalgam for the catalyst of that, just made much more ridiculous and funny.
Exactly. I can definitely see that. I hadn't thought to put Blofeld into the scenario at all, as far as coming up with anything. I kind of
because he had to come up with an amalgam for Blofeld, but it couldn't be Blofeld because they didn't own the rights anymore at the time.
Well, that and if we're following along with the current chronology as of this film, Blofeld was dead. They had killed him at the beginning of For Your Eyes Only. So I could understand him not being fully there. But
the clinic sequence, I remembered there being more to it, and the frightening thing is I've seen Die Another Day a lot. For a movie that I honestly don't like, I've seen it a lot. I think this was the 5th or 6th time I've watched it. And I do have that problem with certain movies where I know it's bad, I know it's horrible, but I'll reach for it anyway. And I'll reach for it ahead of a movie that is critically much better. Like, for example, critically excellent film, Shawshank Redemption. I have seen it twice. That's one more time than I needed to see it. I never want to see it again.
I'm definitely... I question your judgment, sir, to fit in with the theme of the movie. That's one of those movies that I don't care if there's 5 minutes left or 2 hours left. If I come across that movie when it's playing, stop everything and watch the rest of that movie. And if there's not enough left, I've come across it. There was one time, actually, not too long ago, maybe just a few months back, I was flipping through channels, and it happened to be on TV, and it was about maybe 45 minutes in, and I started watching it, and I realized, you know what, this is on broadcast TV, which means there's going to be commercials. I already missed the beginning, so I turned it off. I went and got my DVD of it and started watching it from the beginning in full. See, I love that movie. I think it's fantastic.
I think it's very well made. Critically, it is fantastic. But I just really don't find entertaining a story about someone who's victimized and raped and in prison for things he didn't do and all that. I just don't find that plot entertaining at all. Whereas a movie that I know sucks. I mean, it's terrible. I can't defend anything about this. Aliens vs. Predator Requiem. That movie is trash. It's crap. I watch it at least once a year.
Oh.
It's a running escalation of, okay, that scene was just wrong. What can we do to make it wronger? I know wronger isn't a word.
But it fits the context.
It fits the mentality of that movie.
Right.
And I watch it once a year. And honestly, I've been on a pace to watch Die Another Day about once a year for the past 3 years, because I've seen it 3 times since we started doing the podcast, and I'd seen it 3 times before that. So I know it's bad, but I watch it anyway, and I always laugh at the white guy surgery.
It is an interesting choice for them to go with the gene replacement therapy and whatever else. But again, if it's all in Bond's head, then there's a reason that it's so excruciating and it causes so many side effects. And because even though it's the bad guy getting his way somewhat so he can go on and do all these other things, it still at least hurt him to do it. So Bond still wins a little bit in that sense.
And he even comments about that later when he's talking to him.
Oh yeah. Did it hurt? Good. But
okay,
go ahead.
So we move on from the white guy surgery, and I remember the scenes at the clinic being much more intense than they were, so I was a little disappointed this time around. And I found Jinx's escape to be very, very theatrical in fitting with the theme we're going with the alternate fever dream reality, because it sure as hell doesn't make any sense for her to be that way in a real scene. No need to take the shirt off, no need to just stand there, look around for a while, and then dive. No, she'd just frickin' dive. And the guards would have shot at her from the top of the wall, which they didn't. So I think that also lends itself to the fever dream theory.
I completely agree, and more to the point even, I think that it really fits in with the theory and what you just said before about there not being as much action as it seems in that scene, because if you think about it, really, if we're in his dream, the only things that we should ever see are what he sees. So the scenes where he's not actually present, they're very thin. There's not much to them, because if anything, he's making it up as something that's happening even off of his own radar. So yeah, nothing much is going to be going, that part is going to be very, very thin and flimsy, whereas when he is there, when he is seeing it, that's when he's looking at her, watching her. Then she takes her shirt off and slowly does the swan dive backwards into the water, because now he's involved. And so this is now his fantasy again. We're seeing what he's seeing, and so we're getting more detail, even though it may be completely extraneous detail that shouldn't be there. It's fantasy, baby.
Speaking of fantasy, baby, Eric knows exactly what I'm going to mention next, don't you?
I think so. Let's go.
We have Miranda Frost, played by the lovely Rosamund Pike.
Rosamund Pike has an ability to play a cold-hearted, just mean double-crossing woman. Let me tell you what. Not going to spoil anything for other films that are out more recently than this, but dog, holy moly, she's got a talent for it. Let me tell you what.
She does, and even if she's not the double-crossed woman, she also has that's kind of her niche, is the colder, less emotions type character. In fact, she could step into the role of Bones and work pretty well, I think. It's more colder, analytical.
I could see that. I don't think she has necessarily the... I don't know. I like the character of Bones, but I look at her more like I look at Data on Star Trek Next Generation. It's not simply a lacking of emotions. It's a lacking of the understanding of the emotions. And with Rosamund Pike's characters, it seems more of just the straight-up lacking the emotions, more like a straight-up sociopath. Whereas with Bones, there's that she doesn't quite understand what she's supposed to be feeling. It's not that she doesn't feel anything at all. It's just it doesn't... Yeah, am I making any sense at all?
You are.
Okay,
I get it. And I also want to point out that we're not assigning these characteristics to Rosamund Pike herself as a human being. This just seems to be her niche as an actress for the parts that she's playing. That's an important distinction to make. And she does do the double cross very, very well. And to the point where the shock in this movie is that Miranda Frost is ever considered to be good, that she's ever considered to be on the side of the angels. But I think that, again, fits into the theory of James Bond having his fever dream, and he can't believe he failed on his own, or he failed because of chance. He had to fail because of a double-crossing bitch. And she has to be a hot double-crossing bitch. And so we have a double-crossing bitch played by Rosamund Pike, because she, of course, eventually has to have sex with him. No matter how much the character... It makes no sense. I mean, even up to the point where they're about to jump into bed, she is still like, I can't stand you. You're awful. And then she kisses him again. It's like, no, you're horrible. And not in the way that you usually see in the Opposite Attracts 10 Things I Hate About You, Taming of the Shrew type stuff. In the, no, she really can't stand his ass, but the script says they're going to have sex. So damn it, they're going to have sex. Unfortunately, they're going to have sex under a big, thick, furry blanket, which means we don't get to see it. We don't even get to see much under the furry blanket. We got to see more of Bond and Jinx. Could they have switched casting on this? Is it too late? We had a theory about that was brought up by another listener, and I really liked that. And I'm still going for it if somehow we can do the Wayback Machine thing. Just saying.
There you go. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah, it's quite obvious. Even, like you said, even from the beginning, it's like, yeah, we're supposed to believe she's one of the good guys, but you get this sense from her the entire time. And I don't know if it's just the coldness or if it's, I guess they're going for, we're supposed to believe that she's the one girl who won't fall for Bond's charms, and it just comes off as her being bad. Like, she's going to end up being bad. Watch, this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, Bond would never believe her, so we're not allowed to ever believe her.
Exactly. That's I think what it comes down to. Bond doesn't ever truly trust her. He doesn't even, he's always got this reservation about her, and because of that, then we can't either.
And, of course, he's not allowed to kill her because that's not gentleman sporting, and catfight, come on. He digs a catfight.
He did you. You must be more desperate than I thought.
Oh, God.
All of her lines were bad. Come on. Better hurry up or I'm going to be half the girl I used to be. Just shut up. Please stop talking.
her speech ends up usually being one of three categories. Bond's sex fantasy, where she's hitting on him all the time, of course. Bond talking in his own voice, just like Ningxin suggests that a lot of these characters do, because they do talk in Bond's voice. A lot. Usually with one-liners. And then someone who has never spoken to a black person in their life, thinking of what black people might say. Tell us what you know. Yo mama! She pulls a yo mama!
That was actually your best line, I thought.
Because, live and let die. Just saying, honky.
Yep. Yeah, it's very ridiculous. Her whole character is utterly ridiculous. I actually thought in the context of this theory, I kind of picture her not just as I didn't necessarily bring Felix into it, but I get that. I thought she was more kind of a reflection of himself. And who does he's Bond. Who does he want to do more than himself? Nobody. So he's
nobody does be better.
So of course he's going to be attracted to himself, and the fact that it's going both ways much more than it normally does kind of led me to that kind of this woman is kind of a projection of his own reflection here, plastered onto whatever female body he happened to be thinking of at the time.
I think that's how he always saw Felix, though, as the American himself.
That's true. I think that was the intention of the character, to be fair.
Well, yeah, but it's just, I think the fact that she's American is important. And also the fact that every other American is represented by Michael Madsen, who is a complete clod.
Yeah.
And again, his character is just a dundering ass the entire time. Just, I have orders from the president. Like, the president is supposed to be able to order everyone else in the world around. Oh, yes, that's right. If you don't live in the United States, that's exactly the opinion you have of how America thinks of itself. I say this as someone who's lived outside the United States, and yeah, the United States is generally looked upon as a bunch of arrogant asses.
It's true.
And that stereotype is Michael Madsen's character, who represents every American who is not screwing James Bond.
Pretty much. Yeah, I definitely can go for that.
I thought that was also an important piece to this puzzle. Now, and of course we have M behaving in the, I see you're useful again. So she's doing the same queen bitch thing that's consistent with how she acted before, where I don't really like you, but now you're useful to me, which I think is how Brosnan Bond has always seen her. Mm-hmm. Now, what about Q? What do you think about how things go with Q?
I think it's pretty... That's the one thing that I thought was fairly typical. I thought it was kind of... Especially since we're supposed to have this new Q or R or whatever we're dealing with here. It's not really Q that we're dealing with. It's the new guy. And that's the one place where I think maybe this fantasy theory breaks down a little bit, because I think if it was in his fantasy, he'd have his old Q back. Now, obviously... that wouldn't be possible in the actual filming of this movie, but I think if it were all in his head, that we would have had Q, not R.
I think that can be explained in the same way that I went with why we don't see Felix and why we don't see Tracy, because it's generally agreed that the moment Desmond Llewellyn died, that Q died. So it's too painful for him to remember his old friend. But if you really listen to John Cleese in this movie, he's talking like Desmond Llewellyn. So we have the old Q character, but not in the old Q's body. We have the old Q character talking through John Cleese. So we can also, of course, get the stupid, silly walk thing in there for people who notice it.
Yeah, I can see that. So that way we're kind of getting that aspect without actually getting Q.
Yeah, so now that, of course, brings us to the lab, which I think is the centerpiece of this theory.
Yes, the fact that everything from every previous movie was suddenly just there, and available. The jetpack was there. The poison dagger shoes, which Bond is simply playing with his finger. Like, you really want to do that with a poison tipped dagger shoe? Maybe you don't want to accidentally cut yourself with that. Just saying. Yeah, that whole scene of all the old relics from the previous films just being there, and he didn't really get anything new other than the car.
Now, one thing I hadn't noticed before that was there, because the only thing I noticed from before from Octopussy was you could see the alligator, the fake one that he swam to the island with. The entire tiny plane is there. It's hanging from the ceiling in parts. The whole little airplane.
Well, all right then. I might have to go back to that scene and just kind of take a look, because I didn't see that.
Yeah, it's on the wall and hanging from this. It's like, damn.
That's awesome.
And this is all supposed to be in the abandoned train station for abandoned spies, which is kind of a folkloric type thing, but it's like, and all of Bond's old equipment just happens to be here.
Yeah. And just Bond's equipment. Like, everything in that room was something that Bond had used specifically. There was nothing in there that any other agent had ever used, and because I'm sure they all got the exact same equipment. Every agent got a jetpack, right?
And then, of course, there is the Vanish. I still think it's freaking stupid.
It really is. I mean, now, on the one hand, I do appreciate that it's the one bit of gadgetry that we get to see in a Bond film that actually does have good, solid roots in actual science and technology.
With that said, it's an application that's at least several decades on.
Yeah, of course. But at least the way they describe it, they didn't make up some weird, like, oh, there's an energy field that bends space-time around the car. No, they didn't make up something stupid. They actually went with the way that type of technology will eventually be developed, because it's already being worked on in that manner. So at least they had a solid foundation in science, and then they just threw it out the window. But at least they had that going for it. But other than that, no. What is the point of taking a flashy, high-end car like an Aston Martin Vanquish and be like, and we're going to make it invisible? There's so many, if you're going to have your car be invisible anyway, there's a lot more utilitarian options to go with.
Citron.
If you want an Aston Martin, you want people to see you're driving around in an Aston Martin.
And then, of course, there are all of the other cars, because Colonel Moon, and by surrogate Zhao, has a collection of wannabe Bond cars, many of which are based on models that have been Bond cars before or considered as Bond cars.
Yeah.
And even though several of them blew up in the explosion that put all the diamonds in Zhao's face, at the beginning of the movie, in the pre-credit sequence, they're all back, which is another great hint toward this theory being super plausible, because the cars that were destroyed are back again.
Oh, that's right. I didn't even think about that one. So yeah, that's very true. Yes, those cars should have been, at least some of them would have been probably destroyed, unless he replaced, I guess in the official storyline it would just be like, oh, he loved those cars so much he had them replaced immediately with identical models, which doesn't sound like his style. If he was going to replace something, it would be with the newest, better thing, not the same exact thing that he had before.
And it does lead to something that I do agree with you. It's kind of cool to watch. You have actual dual Bond car on Bond car.
That is a fun scene, and it's something that I've always wanted to see in a Bond film, is, two supercars going at it as opposed to just one supercar evading regular cars, whether it be a bunch of regular cars or not. It's still cool to see that supercar on supercar action. Although there could have been more, it could have been better, but all in all, it wasn't a horrible scene.
I did think it was kind of silly when they both fired their front missiles at the same time several times, and somehow the missiles miraculously found each other halfway across every time.
Every time. Those are missile-seeking missiles. I'm sorry you didn't notice that part.
I also did like the double shotgun cannons. Those were pretty cool. I kind of have to wonder, though, in the later chase sequence where Bond borrows the Land Racer, which, of course, Graves has been using to try to set the world land speed record.
He beat your time, boss.
He beat your time, boss, yes. He's trying to outrun the Icarus beam. Okay, fine. That's Bond movie thing, and we get Icarus as the diamonds are for whatever. But Graves explains it, and this is the kind of thing that Bond would think up in his head since Bond is not in the room to hear this. So it makes sense in that regard only, because otherwise it doesn't. Watch me take this laser, and I will follow the heat signature of his vehicle, and we will destroy him. Except that this thing burns with the heat of the sun, so as soon as it burns something on the ground, suddenly the surrounding ground is going to be way hotter than the Land Racer, and the heat signature thing doesn't work anymore.
All right, we'll add that to our letter to Neil deGrasse Tyson about this movie. We'll add that part. Be like, whoa, look at this.
And how are we cleaving off icebergs in an instant, and we can have that thing pointed at the ice palace for like 10 minutes and have relatively little melting going on, unless it's all in Bond's head, because he has to have time to save the girl.
Yep.
And of course, he has to make use of your favorite gadget from this movie, the ring.
Oh, yes. The ring that you just knew was going to have some use the second Q showed it to him. It's like, hey, look at this ring. It breaks bulletproof glass or anything. Like, okay, well, he's going to obviously be in a situation where there's some kind of strong glass that he's going to have to break through. Yep, there it is. And again, that's one of those scenes where he was in peril for all of 15 seconds before immediately getting out of it.
Indeed. And then, of course, once we get out of the ice palace, and we have to stop Gustav Graves' dastardly plan to blow up all the mines in the demilitarized zone so the North Korean army can march right into South Korea unopposed. He makes it to the plane just in time, because he has to. Yep. And because it's his perception of how supervillains act, since again, he's not in the room for this, that's just a suitcase. Fix it! Because all villains are, of course, megalomaniacs, so he has to turn Gustav Graves into Iron Man. Now, of course, the Iron Man movie was still 6 years off, but Iron Man had been in comics forever. But just the whole idea of we're turning him into a comic book caricature.
Yeah.
And I think that's how Bond sees his opponents, as caricatures.
I do like that Graves basically controlled that satellite through a power glove from Nintendo, though. I mean, that was pretty cool.
And you'd think that that's kind of an interesting coup, because this is a Sony picture. So you'd think he'd be using a PlayStation.
Yeah, it's crazy how it suddenly all of a sudden it just, okay, he took that suitcase and be like, okay, give me 5 minutes. Okay, now it's a suit. There you go. Wait, what?
Thanks, Jarvis.
Exactly. It's the kind of suspension of disbelief you have to use for that kind of film. But yeah, absolutely. I agree. If you're thinking about it in the terms of this all being in his head, it suddenly makes sense. All they need is an after-credit scene where they show, for me it would be where they show the doctors all, suddenly it cuts to all the doctors and nurses at that facility with M standing in the little anteroom watching as they try and resuscitate him and fail. Or,
and for me it would be...
Maybe they get his heartbeat back, so we can have more movies. I don't know.
For me, it would be a scene where fade in to fog and some Korean soldiers walking up to the edge of a cliff with a brown bag, toss it over the side. It's implied who's inside of it.
Right. Either way, we just killed the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, it is well and truly dead.
But that's okay, because the next film is a reboot anyway, so I think we would be okay with that. So that's what we need to do now. Amateur filmmakers out there listening to this show, go film this scene so that we can put it in and play it immediately after the credits of this movie to make this movie better.
And one other thing about the suitcase.
Yeah.
I think the suitcase was the amalgam for GoldenEye because it reminded me of the suitcase that they carried the keys in.
Yeah, it was very similar. The whole, we've got this case and all this special equipment, which is exactly what's necessary to control this, as opposed to just, all you need is an internet connection and you can control this from just about any computer. No, we have to have this special device that plugs in, and it's just very unique to this. And if this gets destroyed, then the whole thing is shot.
I could run it from my iPhone.
Right. I was like, laser satellite? Hold on, I think I got an app for that.
So overall, looking at Die Another Day from the perspective of Ningxin's fantastic theory, it fits. I think it's wonderful. I like I said at the beginning of this discussion, I think it's the best fan theory I've ever heard for 007 and one of the best I've heard for any franchise.
Yeah, I definitely dig it, and it definitely made watching the film fun again. It's not something I'd go back and I'm going to rewatch this a whole bunch of times now because it's so awesome, but it made sitting through it again not suck, which is awesome because... when I first, when we first looked at this, I was worried that it wasn't going to be enough, and just sitting through this film again was going to just be awful. But taking the time to think about how all these different things, I think there was one particular line that really solidified the theory for me, and that was an interaction between M and Bond, where she says, "While you were away, the world changed," and he says, "Not for me."
Yes.
That to me, I was like, oh my God, that works. That works so much. That's so perfect for this theory. So,
and
yes,
it also
absolutely.
completely excuses Tamahori's direction. The editing, it does everything. It even kind of excuses when Pierce Brosnan forgets to lose his Irish accent every so often. You notice he goes back into Irish?
Every now and I think that's because even he had given up at that point.
I threw it away years ago. He says it in Irish. And yeah, he was, by his own admission, he was sick of the role by now.
Yeah.
And it shows, but I think it also works for the theory. So, Ningxin, well done. Just well done. If I ever get back to Vancouver, I'm buying you a martini.
Yeah.
Shaken, not stirred.
Of course. But yeah, so again, thank you to everybody who answered, and especially to our winners, Steve and Ningxin. We hope you like your prizes. Ningxin will be sending that out to you. Hopefully Customs doesn't throw a fit about a poster coming up.
It wasn't too bad when I was living there and I was ordering posters from the U.S., so I think she'll be okay.
Yeah. So we should be good. I don't think there's any specific restrictions. Not like trying to send a... Hot Wheel to the Netherlands, which evidently you cannot do. Found that one out the hard way. Sorry to you. But still, I think that hopefully we should get those to you either close to or, either before or at least somewhat close to the date this airs. So if you're hearing this and you haven't received your poster yet, I apologize, but just hold on, it'll be there.
Indeed. And thank you again to everyone who entered and everyone who's listening. We really appreciate you being with us, and be ready for our next episode, which will be a very piercing discussion. But in the meantime, this has been the Questioned Judgments episode of Her Majesty's Secret Podcast. Again, you can find us online at hermajestiespod.com, on Facebook at facebook.com/hermajestiespod, on Twitter at hermajestiespod. You can find me on Twitter at cinemaotr. Email me at ziggy@cinemaontherocks.com.
And you can find me on Twitter at Eric J. Dewey, or shoot me an email, eric at foureyedradio.com, or eric at hermajestiespod.com, whatever works. And definitely let us know how you feel about any of our episodes. We love hearing it. Even if you don't like something about what we've said, if you disagree, we'd love to hear it. Because, we may not agree with you, we may not change our position, but we'd love to hear it, we'd love to discuss it, and we thank you for listening.
And we may change our position, who knows? And something else to look forward to won't be coming anytime really soon, but in the near future, we will be turning the tables on the Question Judgments contest, where I will question Eric's judgment on a movie we've discussed, and he will question mine, and we will do this again, where each of us picks one of the movies where we discuss. So look forward to that sometime in the future. But for right now, I'm Ziggy Berkeley.
And I'm Eric Dewey.
And you've been listening to Her Majesty's Secret Podcast, only on The Fern.
This has been another great presentation by the 4-Eyed Radio Network. You can find more information at 4eyedradio.com.